I'm here to welcome you on behalf of the North Carolina legislature. I am Senator Doug Berger, and I represent Franklin, Graham, Vance, and Warren County, and I am here to bring greetings to you on behalf of the North Carolina legislature. But I'm also here to share with you my personal story and my personal involvement in this effort. Many of you may know, but I suspect there are many of you in the audience aren't aware that your state senator was involved in this movement 30 years ago. Now, I grew up in Johnston County in Smithfield, and for those of you who are long in the tooth like me can remember a time when people would travel down to the beach down 70 Highway and they would be welcomed into that community by a sign that said, "Welcome to Smithfield, home of the Ku Klux Klan." So that was the community that I grew up in, and I was a first-generation student that went through desegregation. In fact, it was only 11 years prior to the PCB Protest that the schools in North Carolina were fully desegregated. In fact, it was the 5th grade in which I actually began to go to school with people of other color. I entered the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill as a freshman in 1978. I had been schooled in high school with the ideas of Henry David Thoreau and Martin Luther King. And when I went to Chapel Hill, I had the opportunity to see some of the first protests as I stood on the sidelines and watched students protesting the university admissions policy, which at that time, even though over 11% of the nation and 21% of the state were African Americans, or being African Americans turned away from the university in terms of its admission policies, even though they were eminently qualified students with very high SATs. In 1982, I graduated from Chapel Hill, and the first job I had was with a group called the Public Interest Research Group. And it was a group that was principally dedicated to doing work on environmental issues, and specifically clean water. That was 1982, the fall of 1982, and that was my first job. And the first issue I took up as a leader of that organization was to organize students from Chapel Hill to come over to Warren County in support of the protest against the decision to place PCB in this community. And the reason I share with you sort of my background where I grew up is because I want you to fully understand that the events in 1982 in this community shaped who I am and what I'm committed to and what I believe in. Because it was in this very church as a 22-year-old that I saw regular white and black people together taking on very powerful interests. It's not something that I had seen in my own community. I had seen more clashing between the two races than I had seen unified action against the very powerful interests that seek to divide us. And that was a very moving experience. In fact, I can remember the woman who was a leader from Love Canal and that battle up north coming to speak to us and inspire us to take on that fight. And I participated in the marches, and I can remember some of the chants: dump, hunt, in the dump, hunt, in the dump. I can remember black and white together, we shall not be moved. And I made the decision as a young man, 22 years old, my future ahead of me. It wasn't a high-paying job. You don't get paid a whole lot of money to do clean water work. You can ask Hope Taylor that. But I made the decision when we were called upon to engage in acts of civil disobedience to put my body on the line. In fact, when I was at UNC, one of the first speakers I went to see was a fellow by the name of Dr. Benjamin Spock. Again, for those of you that are long in the tooth, remember Dr. Spock was the preeminent expert in the United States on raising children. He was called the baby doctor. And that's what I went to think I was hearing him to speak. But when I went there, he shared with us the work he had done against Vietnam, and he challenged me as a young person and all of us in the audience. He said, it's very important as a young person that you know what it's like to be on the other side of the law for a good cause. And that was the message I got at UNC, and my opportunity to get arrested, to feel the weight of power on the other side for a good cause took place here in Warren County. Not only once, but twice, I put my body down with the fellow citizens of Warren County and other people that were coming from different parts of the state, and I was arrested twice. All right. And I was transported on a bus over to the local county jail, and I was being processed in line. And as I was going through the line, the jailer that was sitting there having us tell our name, our address, who our contact person, who do we want called to make our phone call out of jail, he looked at me and said, son, you have ruined your life. What are you going to do now? And I looked at him and I said, sir, I'm going to go to law school, and I'm going to come out, and I'm going to fight for justice.
Amen.
I share with you that experience because I think it's important that you know that sometimes our individual conscience calls upon us to have to answer to a higher authority than the government. And that's what the people of this community did. They said it was wrong to make a decision to dump a very dangerous substance in a very, very vulnerable population. It was a good experience for me for what I would later be provided by God to be able to serve the people of North Carolina. Because as I went through that line, when we were arrested, to the outside world, it would appear that we were being lifted carefully and placed into the buses. We were trained in nonviolent civil disobedience. But the officers would take their fingers and they would jab them into your armpit. And let me tell you, it hurt. So while it was nonviolence on the part of the protesters, it would not be fair to say that the state reacted in a nonviolent fashion. But they did it in a way that was not visible to the outside world. That was an important experience because the next time I came to Warren County, I was hired to be the criminal prosecutor for this county, to have charged the responsibility of deciding who would be punished and what their punishment would be. So it was a good perspective as a prosecutor to know what the government can do sometimes that's inappropriate, and to be more cognizant of the responsibility of doing justice as a prosecutor.
Yes.
Now, I served in this community for for over 4 years as your prosecutor. I've been your senator for 8 years. And what I would ask each of you to take away from what has happened in Warren County and this struggle is that the fight doesn't end. The fight continues. And you may be called upon to engage in some of the same struggle and not in the immediate future. Because we have very challenging issues confronting us when it comes to the environment. The state of Virginia is looking to lift a ban on uranium that could, if allowed, poison the very waters that we drink in this area, the Carr Lake. The state of North Carolina, much like it did 30 years ago, is communicating to folks that this procedure called fracking can be done safely, and just trust the government, and we will make sure your water's clean. These are issues that are confronting us. We need to prepare to take the values here in Warren County in terms of the fight against injustice and be prepared to continue that fight in the future. This is my last term serving as your senator. In fact, I'm in a very, very tough campaign. My opponent has already spent a couple $100,000, and it looks like the opposition party is going to spend between $500 and $1 million to try to take me out of office. And my campaign staff said, "Why are you going over to Warren County? They're no longer your constituents. You're in a tough campaign. You need to be out getting votes here 7 weeks from the election." And I explained to them that this is too important. This is part of my history and my life. And if God doesn't see for my life continued service in the Senate, He has something better for me to do.
Well,
and it is important to me to be part of this than it is to be out getting votes today, at least this morning. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I know.
that was so eloquent, Senator Berger. Thank you so very much for what you have meant to this community down through the years. I am Congressman G.K. Butterfield. Not only do I represent Warren County, but 23 other counties in North Carolina, and it is my joy to be with you today. Yes, Dolly Burwell, who is a trusted member of my staff, called me in Washington the other day and told me that she recognized that I would not be able to be here on Saturday morning because of my commitments in Washington, but said to me that she would bring greetings to you on my behalf. I very quickly told her that I could be here. That's what automobiles are for. I don't have to get on an airplane all the time. I drove into Henderson last night and got a good night's sleep, and here I am this morning. I wanted to come. I wanted to come because I know the history of this movement and what it has meant to this community, what it has meant to this state, nation, and world. And so I've come today to celebrate and to thank all of you. First of all, I want to celebrate this historic church. This church has been in this community for many years and has done so much for so many. There's a lot of history in this community. If you don't know the history of Warren County and Vance County and Granville County, I want you to go on the internet and take a few minutes just to research what this community has meant to this state. There's a lot of history in this community. What many of you may not know is that the first African American to serve in the U.S. Congress from North Carolina was from Warren County, John Adams Hyman. What you may not know is that the third African American to serve in the U.S. Congress was from Vance Granville County, Henry Plummer Cheatham. What you must also understand is that the fifth Congressperson to serve in Congress was Eva Clayton from Warren County. And the sixth African American to serve in Congress was from Warren County, Frank Winston Ballance Jr. There's a lot of history in this community. And so when Dolly said that we were meeting this morning, I wanted to come to join with you because this was the epicenter of African American activism and political activity for many years. And so I've come today to thank you, to thank each one of you for the role that you played. I was not here during the PCB protest. I was on another mission. I was in a courtroom fighting for voting rights for African Americans in North Carolina. We were litigating over in Granville and Vance County to open up political opportunities. We were challenging the state on the method of electing state representatives and state senators, and out of that, out of the voting rights movement, which was taking place at the same time as the PCB movement, we opened up political opportunities so a representative, Frank Ballance, could get elected, and later a state senator, Frank Ballance, could get elected, and the list goes on. And now we are continuing that legacy. Now we have a future generation, Nathan Baskerville, who's now going to take up the torch and represent Warren County and this community. And so we've come a long ways. Come a long way. But I'll say to you in closing, and those of you in elective office certainly can appreciate, I cannot take my seat without at least for a moment reflecting on what is happening in Washington.
Yes, please.
There's a dark cloud hanging over Washington. I will not convert this program into a political rally because that would be inappropriate on my part, but I want you to pay attention to what is happening in Washington. There are people in Washington who are trying to reduce the federal deficit and balance the federal budget on the backs of poor people and environmental justice programs and other programs that we care so deeply about. So this election matters. I want you to pay attention and know that the outcome of this election is not only going to affect this community and your issues for the next 4 years, but for a generation. Thank you so much for having me today.
While I was up here, I forgot to recognize our team, Environmental Action Team. Would everybody serving on the Environmental Action Team please stand? We've got representatives from our local government, faith community, citizens, young people as well. And if you look at your bulletin, our logo was done by our local artist, Wanda Satterwhite, who was involved in the protest. She couldn't be here this morning. And if you look at the picture very clearly, you see lots of green, you got to see growing things, you see lake and sun, sky, trees, you see protesters. And we said Warren County has a history of having wonderful natural resources, and this little slice of the pie, this protest, this PCB thing was just a small piece of our history, and we don't want it to dominate our history. But we realize that we have to keep this banner up. We have to be a voice against what's happening in Washington, D.C. and when it comes to environmental justice issues. But I just want to acknowledge our team, and thanks again, team, for working together.
Amen. That's what we have come to celebrate today, that God has been mighty good to us. Amen. Amen. Songwriter says, through many dangers, toils, and snares, we've already come. It was God's grace that brought us safe thus far. Grace will lead us home. We're now going to enter into, we've already heard some reflections, but we're going to ask a catalyst in this community, a community activist, community leader, and just a person you can always count on. Sister Dolly Burwell is going to come to lead us in this part of our service where we will hear of the reflections and go back and think about some of the things that have taken place. Our time in reflection will begin with a commemorative slideshow at this time.